Hey y'all, it's Nifty here. I wanted to give you a quick presentation today. I'm giving you the same talk that I did at LABITCONF in early November, but I'm re-recording it in English since I gave that one in some choppy Portuguese. So the talk that I'm going through is about covenants. Specifically, we're going to be talking about what covenants enable and why, kind of like the the power of introspection. So really, whenever you have a covenant, the tool that you're looking to get is transaction introspection. So today I'm going to talk through how that works and some of the proposals that have been made and kind of a little bit about how they work or might work in some cases. So again, I'm Nifty, Nifty Nye. I run Base 58. I also do Bitcoin++ or BTC++. Worked on Lightning for a long time, and now I talk about things in Bitcoin. Cool. So to set this up, let's start with a Bitcoin transaction. A Bitcoin transaction has some Bitcoin locked up in it. A Bitcoin transaction, one way to think about it is just like any normal form, like you might fill in at the DMV. Bitcoin transaction has a couple fields on of it. One of those fields is how much Bitcoin you have, and a locking script that you have to unlock. When you go to spend that Bitcoin, you unlock the lock in a new transaction, and then you usually lock up that Bitcoin in new outputs. So a new transaction will be another form with more outputs. And again, in order to spend this Bitcoin by putting it in a new transaction, you have to unlock this lock. Cool. So one of the things that you might want to do with a transaction lock is say, okay, I can only unlock this lock if I can look at the transaction that's spending it, and this first output on it, the first place where you're sending Bitcoin, let's say it has to send to a blue lock, for example. That power to be able to look at the transaction that is spending the yellow lock is called introspection. And this isn't something that we can really do today in Bitcoin very easily. So again, introspection, that's the ability to see what exists on a transaction that spends Bitcoin. So it's able to kind of look ahead at the transaction you're spending Bitcoin in and see what kind of information is in there. Again, we don't have this in Bitcoin currently, at least not for looking at like the first output of a transaction spending some Bitcoin. Okay, so maybe it would be nice to have this. How would we add it? It's going to require some new opcodes to be able to look at the first output. So we should go through some of the proposals that are out there. But before we get into that, I want to kind of drive home this idea that introspection already exists. The only problem is that it's limited. So it doesn't let you say, look at the first output in the next transaction. It does let you look at some fields in that next transaction. Again, it's like a form. It's got different fields in it. One of the fields, you can only look at two fields right now. You can only introspect two fields. One of the fields is called sequence number. So you can look at the sequence. Sequence always has a numeric value. The opcode that lets you look at the value in the next transaction is called the CSV, or check sequence verify. The sequence is the S part. So you can write op CSV into this lock, and then when you go to spend or unlock this yellow lock, you're able to look at what the value is written into the sequence field on that transaction. And in this case, that's 3,921. So it lets you look at a numeric value when you're evaluating a script, and you can check, okay, is this number above or below some other value that I want it to be? And only if it's above or below it, allow this Bitcoin to be spent. Again, we don't have an introspection opcode that lets us look at, for example, other parts of the transaction like outputs. So let's invent a new opcode that lets us see exactly that. I'm inventing this. This hasn't been seriously proposed by anyone, but I'm going to say that we can use op output. And the way this would work is you'd put it into the yellow lock as an opcode, and then that would give you information, let you introspect, as it were, the information about, let's say, just the first output. It tell you the amount and maybe what the color of the lock or what that lock looked like. And then maybe if we wanted to see just the second output, we could change this opcode. So I could say, which index output I want to look at. So I could look at maybe the second one or something like that. And that's introspection. That's the power that covenants are trying to give you. It's the ability to inspect data in a transaction that you're spending. Great. Maybe we don't want all the information. Maybe we just want to know the amount of Bitcoin in an output. So we could add another op code called output value. So it just gives us the value back. So then we can make assertions about that value. And that the Bitcoin that's locked up under yellow would only be unlocked in the case that the assertions about the output value are true. So you could come up with a bunch of different opcodes for each of the different fields in a transaction, like the number of outputs, output count, the TX-ID of an input, that kind of thing. This is something you could add, and it will let you introspect a lot of different information about a transaction where Bitcoin is being spent. And in fact, so this is like kind of a proposal that I pulled from the Liquid network, which already has these introspection opcodes, and that's in fact exactly how they added it. They added an opcode for almost everything you might want to know about a transaction where you're spending Bitcoin, and they added them into Liquid as part of when they also did the Taproot upgrade. So all of these opcodes, introspection opcodes, are available in Liquid, and so you can look at like, okay, tell me what the weight of that entire transaction is, and there's an opcode for that in Liquid. So you can write more expressive scripts that let you make more precise conditions around when you can spend Bitcoin because you have access to all these opcodes. This is a lot of opcodes. No one has proposed that we add this many opcodes to Bitcoin main layer, the mainnet, excuse me. Instead, people have proposed a few other things. For example, let's start with optx. So maybe instead of doing a different opcode for every field that there is in a Bitcoin transaction, we could make one opcode called optx. And how this would work is you number the different fields in a transaction, or you give them like a little flag. And then it's almost like a menu, or a menu that you can dial numbers on. So whenever you lock Bitcoin up, you could say, okay, I want to look at field number 2 and number 1. So you could use optx to look at specific fields on the spending transaction without needing to use a bunch of different opcodes. So that's one option. So that's how you'd inspect it. TX hash takes the same idea and makes it a little more complicated. So instead of directly being able to see the data, like in opCSV, you can see what the number is. optx hash has the same idea as optx, where you would pick which fields you want to look at, 2 and 1. I should have put TX hash here, not TX. And then instead of just letting you look directly at the data in those fields, first you hash it together. And the only thing that you're able to introspect or look at from this lock that you made would be the hash of that resulting data. So one of the downsides of this method of using hashes is that you're not able to do any comparisons with numbers. So you couldn't say greater than or less than. You'd have to say directly equal to, which might not be desirable. One of the upsides is that it's a lot less data to look at. So you're exposing a smaller amount of data to the make a decision on. So that makes the scripts run a little bit faster, is my understanding. Cool. Okay, so maybe, optx and optx hash aren't well known. Maybe you have heard of opctv or check template verify. This was proposed by Jeremy Rubin in 2019. If you're not counting opCSV and opcltv, which were merged into Bitcoin mainnet in like 2016, 2017, I think this is the first serious proposal to do introspection more broadly on Bitcoin transactions. So it does have the benefit of being the oldest. It's, again, check template verify. Remember we had check sequence verify, which let you look at the sequence. Here, template is kind of a generic term that if we go back to how optx or optx hash worked with a menu of options, instead of giving you a menu, it picks a fixed set of fields that you're looking at. So instead of saying, okay, look, I can say I want to look at XYZ fields in a transaction, it has a fixed set of fields that it always looks at. There's no ability to change those. It creates a hash, and then you're able to look or introspect kind of at that hash. So this lets you look at hashes of data, and then you can say, okay, is that the hash that I was expecting or not? So it's pretty simple. I would say this is definitely the least simple. I mean, not the least simple, the most simple in terms of like what you're able to do. Right. Doesn't give you very many options. Cool. The other thing that's been floating around that lets you do some sort of introspection is called OpCat. I am going to skip over this one because it's kind of complicated. I would say it's sort of like CTV, and then it lets you look at a hash of data, but that's not entirely true. It's a little bit more like OpTX that lets you directly look at data. Is that true? Anyways, it's a bit more complicated. Maybe I'll do a video in the future that talks about how that works, but I'm going to skip over it for now. The general idea that I want you to walk away with, though, is what we're actually trying to do with covenants or with introspection, really. Why do we need it? Why is this a thing that people seem to think that Bitcoin really needs in order to scale? I think this is a good question. I have to be honest that I'm still kind of working out how this is helping with the scaling mechanism. But here's a few things that I've heard. So one thing you could do with this is say every time you spend Bitcoin, you have to send the blue lock 134 Bitcoin. And then if you send it to that same lock again, then you would have to always send 134. That's not Bitcoin, but whatever. 134 Bitcoin to that blue lock every time you spend the yellow lock. So if you lock up to the yellow lock, you always have to pay out the blue lock in order to spend that Bitcoin. So that's one example of a thing you could do if you have the ability to do introspection. You can make assertions about what that next transaction that the Bitcoin moves into must look like. How does this lead to scaling? One of the examples that I see come out a lot is how, let's say you have 1,000 people that all have Bitcoin that's shared in this one UTXO, this one output, it's locked up. It's really hard to put 1,000 locks on the Bitcoin, and then if you ever wanted to spend it, you'd have to go talk to those 1,000 people to ask them to sign off to spend the Bitcoin. That doesn't really scale well, even if you give everyone their own key to it. So one of the ideas is that rather than having everyone have to be around with a key to spend it, you can create a transaction that just lists out who gets those Bitcoin. And then you wouldn't actually send it to chain. You would just write it into the lock as, this Bitcoin must exist for these people. And then maybe you could trade the fact that you owned a claim to this Bitcoin that has been locked up but hasn't been actually published to chain as a way to scale how Bitcoin works. Great. I feel like I should probably come back to this and do a more in-depth video about how these proposals work. But again, the idea for this video is just to kind of explain what introspection is and how it works. Cool. Cool. So introspection is really the ability that we're looking to add to Bitcoin when people talk about covenants. This is what they're really going for. Cool. I wanted to take a moment to plug some projects that I'm doing now. I run a conference series called Bitcoin++. We're doing an event in Brazil in February, which is all going to be all about hacking and building on Bitcoin. And I'm really excited about being able to do our first conference down in Brazil in the beautiful city of Florianopolis, and hope that you'll join us. You can find more info on our website at btcpp.dev. And then I also run Base 58, which is a software engineering school built on a Bitcoin standard. Currently working on getting our class schedule out for the spring, and hope to see some of you. We also have some online Udemy classes, and really hope that if you're interested in learning more about how Bitcoin works, you'll consider checking out some of our classes and school. Great. All right, cool. Thanks, y'all.